Accountability Now Director Advocate Paul Hoffman joins us to discuss this further. Thank you so much, Advocate, for your time. So you've called the tender system to be scrapped and funds paid directly to undergraduates after a report by the organization Undoing Tax Abuse. Firstly, let me get your reaction then to the stepping down, I would imagine, of the NSFAS board chair and the minister's insistence that he is, in fact, innocent and doesn't obviously believe that these allegations are true.
Yes, thank you for having me, Anati, and good afternoon to your viewers. Let's deal with the position of Mr. Khoza first. He's essentially put himself on gardening leave in order to let the dust settle around the allegations that come out of the report that has been prepared by the organization against tax abuse, OTA. OTA has what appear to be audio recordings of conversations in which irregularities, bribery, and corruption are discussed. And that report has been referred both to the Hawks and to the National Prosecuting Authority, and it is really their job to get on and see whether that gardening leave should be turned into a full-on suspension and perhaps even a removal of Mr. Khoza. As far as the minister is concerned, he denies all wrongdoing. And unlike Mr. Khoza, he is not prepared to put himself on gardening leave. He is, of course, answerable to Parliament because he is a member of the executive branch of government, and the charges that have been laid both against him and against Mr. Khoza. So the Criminal Justice Administration is the correct place in which this scandal has to be brought to a head and dealt with. So one hopes that diligently and without delay, the investigators and prosecutors will put their shoulders to the wheel and get to the bottom of the problem. But systemically speaking, the real problem is that instead of using their own staff, the fund has decided to bring in outside contractors to do the work that their own staff apparently is overwhelmed by. Now, that is an abuse of the constitutional value system that is in place. They ought to be giving their services in a manner that is effective, efficient, and economic. It's not economic to pay a commercial entity to do work that could just as easily be done by the public servants who are in the employ of the agency. So unless and until that problem is addressed, the opportunity for tenderpreneurism, for irregularities in tenders, and some of these tenders have been set aside as unconstitutional, is going to recur.
Yeah. Advocate Hoffman, you actually mentioned as you were answering that question that, so getting rid of this whole tender system, that would solve the crux of the matter, the underlying systemic issues. But that's only part of it, I would imagine, because the issue with the NSFAS go deeper than that, don't you think? I mean, having public servants manage this entire thing would probably bring us back to square one. What are we missing here? What are some of the other issues that we should be looking at? Perhaps political will?
Yes, it's really a question of failing to put proper human resource management practices in place in the public administration. Section 195(1) of the Constitution says what the values and principles are, and deploying cadres of the National Democratic Revolution to drive desks or basically get fat on the staff of the NSFAS is not what the Constitution contemplates. So instead of appointing people who are neither qualified nor competent to do the fairly simple work of sifting applications for assistance and paying successful applicants their money regularly, on time, every time, the government has chosen instead to have this administration in which a whole lot of deployed cadres of the National Democratic Revolution swan around doing nothing, and then employ private contractors to do the work that they're supposed to be doing. So the problem that is being missed is that the public administration is not being run along the lines required in binding terms by the Constitution, and it won't be until cadre deployment in the public administration is abolished and competent people are employed to do the sort of work that NSFAS is meant to do. That's the hidden part of it.
So just on the other note, I mean, we know there is a parallel, situation happening in as far as the investigations that are already happening within the higher Department of Education. But we also know that, of course, with this particular matter, the EFF, Action SA, and the DA have opened criminal cases, regarding the allegations against the minister and COSA. How confident, are you that there will be action, and I'm asking you this because we have to consider the fact that our, law enforcement agencies are currently failing to deal with corruption. I mean, we heard the Justice Minister Ronald Lamola saying and emphasizing that the NPA, for instance, and its investigating director, they lack the funds to deal with corruption and state capture cases.
Yes, it is so that the criminal justice administration is broken. It does need to be fixed. And if you had time to listen to the president's January the 8th speech today, he was encouragingly vague about what he intends to do on the task of combating corruption and crime in South Africa, which means that he may well be looking seriously at what was suggested to him apparently for the first time in 2019 by the IFP and is now being followed up on by the DA, which is to create a proper Chapter 9 institution, a whole new institution to deal with serious corruption in South Africa. So let's all hold thumbs that the ANC recognizes that they cannot continue with the broken criminal justice administration that was broken during the state capture period and has not been fixed since then. But obviously, if the police and the prosecutors realize that this is a really important case because students will burn down universities if they don't get their grants on time in the months ahead, that ought to be impetus to get the matter dealt with properly. There's no point in having it investigated in Parliament, as the Secretary General of the ANC has told us in recent days. The ANC members are wont to lie to protect their leaders, as happened in the Nkandla scandal and could happen in this scandal. So let's not waste time and effort going through the motions of an investigation in Parliament. Rather let the police subpoena the documentation that OTA has not been able to get hold of. Let the prosecutors consider the docket and let the investigation lead to either an exoneration or to charges being laid against both Mr. Khoza and the minister.
Advocate, I'd hate to end this conversation with pressing you on a solution, but one is probably desperately sought by some of those students who are going to be returning to school either end of this month or, next month. What avenues legally can they take, should the funding issues persist?
Yes, I suppose it is possible to launch urgent High Court proceedings for relief around the breakdown of the system, but that would have to be done in the course of public interest litigation that the students clearly can't afford themselves and would have to be funded by a suitably geared organization. There's also a point that occurs to me that I ought not to have left hanging in the air. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the procurement of goods and services by the state if it is done in accordance with the principles of Section 217 of the Constitution, which means that the tenders must be done in a way that's fair and equitable and cost-effective and transparent and accountable and all those nice things. But what we have in this instance is a situation in which the staff of the agency created to administer student grants is simply not up to the task at hand, and there's then a duplication because of the tenders, and the tenders that happened were not the sort of tenders that the Constitution requires. They're the sort of tenders that have become known as tenderpreneurism because there is the element of corruption in them. So let's hope that the Hawks and the ID realize, the ID being the investigative directorate of the National Prosecuting Authority, let's hope that they realize that this is a matter that cannot be left somewhere near the bottom of the in tray of dockets with which they are swamped, and that it is a matter that requires urgent attention so that we can get to the bottom of what is going on.